Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it, man.
So last time we spoke, it was the start of the year, and you were coming off a successful 2023 and gearing up for a big 2024. You had records and trophies to defend and records and trophies to go after, but it didn't quite work out like that. Could you give us a brief 0 to 60 of what's happened since we last spoke?
I would kind of describe it as I went from feeling like I could show up to almost any race that I wanted to, whether it was a OCR race, like a Spartan race, or a HYROX race, or a DEKA Fit, or even like a trail running race. I honestly believed I could win, or like at least be in the running to win at at any of those. I I really felt like I had finally gotten to the point where I was so versatile, which is what I very much value is not being pigeonholed into one thing anymore, but being able to have fun and experience a lot of different types of sport, and also show people that a lot more is possible than what they think. I went from feeling like that to getting winded walking upstairs. That's the that's the 0 to 60 as fast as you can get it. I moved to the UAE in the Middle East. I was working for the Dubai police force, training their SWAT team, doing like physical training with them and OCR training. And a few weeks into being there, I definitely was the fittest I had ever been for HYROX. I had won DEKA Fit and DEKA Mile world champs, and then I had won 3K OCR world champs in Mammoth, and I had also dropped one of the fastest HYROX times. It was like a 55:40 or something like that. So sub 56, which at the time was pretty fast. I know that they've gotten new sleds and stuff since then, so I don't know I don't know if those are faster because they're brand new or not. Honestly, I don't care. I value more like showing up to the race, and whoever you race against, that's who you're going against, and you have the same sleds, hopefully. So normally I would not consider living in a place like Dubai because there's not as many mountains around that area. You have to drive at least an hour or two to get to some real mountains there, and it's all dry and deserty. Um, but because I was focused on trying to win HYROX World Champs, they had a world-class training facility there. It was a really good job, really supportive about me racing as well while I was working for them. And so it just seemed like it was perfect. And I went there and I had, like, I've never even had full-time access to a ski erg before. And I've done well in HYROX. So I was like, I have a rower, I have a ski erg, I have sleds, like I have like free massages and, a hyperbaric chamber, all this stuff. I was like, it's time to go. And so I went and had access to this world-class training facility, and I was fitter than I had ever been for flat running plus strength, which is the perfect recipe for HYROX. And I even put on a little bit of size to be able to push the sleds, especially pulling the sled. That's typically where I've lost the most time to people. I'm really good at lunges. I'm pretty good at the burpee broad jumps, and the rower and the skier I'm not bad at all. I think I still have one of the fastest 8K splits as far as running. So typically that's where I make up the time, is the running. But the sled pull in particular, I really needed to work on. So I was really working on like rear chain strength, a lot of single leg strength as well for the sled push. And numbers were going up. And then I was also running faster than I ever had. And I was so excited. And then I had like a lifetime PR in a workout. It was 5 by 5. It was 5 by 1 mile with a 2-minute float in between at like 8-minute recovery pace, or 8 minutes per mile pace. All of those reps I did about 5-minute mile pace, or 5:05. So I was really, really fit for me. That was very fit. And 2 days later, I just had this weird sensation of my throat closing off while I was doing an easy cycling ride in the desert. And since that day, I've never been the same. Um, and I've had good days and bad days. Actually, literally an hour after I got out of the ER, because they just said it was asthma, gave me some inhalers and stuff. And so I, of course, as soon as I got out of the ER, I hadn't finished my training that day. So I took the inhaler and I was like, well, let's see if it works. And I went and ran and I was like, something's not right. Like, this is not it. And after about a week or two of trying to stay there, then I thought, well, maybe it's the pollution in the air. So I moved back to the United States, because that's where I'm from, and moved back home to, the mountain air that I'm used to. And I thought maybe it helped a little bit for a small amount of time, but then it quickly became apparent that something was still very wrong. I went from doing, I have this standard like mountain trail half marathon route that I run from my house because I'm super close to the mountains. And then I run all the way across the mountains and then back, and it ends up being like 13.2 miles, so slightly more than a half marathon. And I was averaging like between 60 to 90 seconds per mile slower each mile.
Wow.
So significant difference. So especially like in a HYROX, that puts me like 6 minutes slower than I used to be. And so I gave up my world championship spot because it didn't seem like I should take it, because I knew I wasn't going to be competitive. And yeah, I've been trying to figure it out since March, and I honestly don't feel like I am any closer to knowing exactly what it is. They think my vocal cords might be spasming as well. They think my trachea is actually collapsing underneath as well, and they kind of fight against each other. My lung function is really, really good. I have big lungs, and they say that they're doing well, but yeah, I don't know, man.
So, in amongst all of this of going from medical expert to medical expert, trying to get some answers, you've strung together a series of training plans and workouts to sort of keep a semblance of sanity or fitness. And what I really wanted to do in this episode is sort of dive into the main five in which you've done, because we've all been ill, we've all been injured on a lot of smaller scale, because obviously you're a world-class athlete, but also you're a coach as well. So you really sit on both sides of the playing field. And I thought we could go into each one as you've listed online and sort of delve into it, and then hopefully provide some value for everyone who has been ill or injured and will be in the future.
Yeah, I would love to do that. First off, like, I want to be honest with people who are also going through maybe an unknown medical problem. I feel like that's probably the most difficult scenario when you don't know how to become better. But also anyone, even if they've just broken a bone, or sprained an ankle or torn a ligament, something like that. I think the biggest thing that is hard not to fall into is that state of despair, like nothing matters anymore. And I will be 100% honest in saying that I have been there a few times. There have been days where I have thrown in the towel, more often than I would be proud to admit, for sure. There was one day where I did the math on how many total rest days I had taken in my life, because I grew up in a family where, especially as I really started focusing on endurance sports, it was already ingrained in me that every day you at least do 30 minutes to an hour of exercise, because it's good for you. And so even as a kid, I never took full recovery days. It was always at least active recovery, like juggling the soccer ball or going to shoot for like a couple hours or something, because I was a football player or soccer player, whatever you want to, depending on if you live in the States or not. Um, I started to notice like these days where I would throw in the towel, and I would run like a quarter mile and just feel so terrible. I would just walk back home. That's probably happened 4 or 5 times. And those days really started making me think of, like, in my whole life, I've taken between 100 and 150 days of like no activity, which is not that many considering how many days I've been alive at 26 years old. I'm counting from like basically around the age of like 6 or 7 um, to now. And so prior to that, I don't know. Um, but yeah, like it's just something that's so ingrained in me. And so when I started to see myself kind of allowing my circumstances of feeling so miserable and like I was so caged and limited by what my body could handle to take more complete rest days, I also noticed like my mental health was dropping substantially. And that was really early on because I went from feeling the fittest I had ever been to feeling like a shell of myself. Um, and that contrast was so drastic that even if I could run an 8-minute mile pace, it wasn't a 5-minute mile pace. So it was easy for me to think like, it's not worth it, dude. Like just go home and rest. But after enough time of that, like if you never get outside, like you're still not getting the vitamin D, you're still not getting the sunlight. You're messing up your circadian rhythm. Like all of that is starting to compound, and it really affects your mental health too. So I had to get to a point where I had to be okay with still running or still training, even though I felt terrible, because it would help my mentality. So that would be the biggest step, I think, to people who are injured, is trying to remember and also maintain that belief that like something still matters. Um, even if your goal is to be like the best in the world at something, and then you feel like you're not even top in age group anymore, still realizing, which I think takes like a cycle of grieving and understanding, uh, that even if you're not the fittest in the world, uh, or the fittest you have ever been, there's still a lot of mental benefits to continuing to have some sort of routine or cycle. So I have stepped back from the type of training I have always done or have done for the last few years, but I still am trying to go on at least a small run every day, if not, like 5 to 10 miles. Um, and still trying to get strength training in like 2 to 4 times per week. And then also still trying to make time for things that I find really enjoyable, like climbing or running, and flying off a mountain. So those things I think are really important to find. So like if I remember when I fractured my heel a few years back, I would always feel better after doing like a skier workout. Since I couldn't do lower body stuff, I'd hop on the skier, or I would use the assault bike and prop my broken leg off to the side and just pedal with one leg and use the arms. Um, and I would always feel healthier mentally after that. I think that is the biggest thing if you're injured, is find something you can do. Because if you just do nothing and start watching like so much TV and so many movies and scrolling Instagram for hours, you're constantly in that cycle of like just waiting for life to get better instead of making it better. um that, and then there's a lot of science on like blood flow, helps you regenerate faster, it helps you heal faster. And so even if you're training the non-injured side, if you have an injured leg or an injured arm, like training the non-injured side actually helps maintain muscle mass in your injured side, which is crazy to me. Like you could never touch one leg, but if you train your other leg, it will help maintain muscle in the leg that you're not even using. It's crazy. So yeah, like trying to find those things is huge.
And that very much stems into what you said online. You said needing grace to not throw in the towel and putting it all out the window.
Yeah, I think that's the second biggest thing, is trying to fight against that mindset, especially when you're really used to your routine, or you're a very high level athlete. When all of that's taken away and you don't feel as special anymore, you don't feel as gifted or as motivated, uh, it really gets to a point where it feels like it's not really worth it anymore. Because when you're a very high level athlete, it's not just about exercise in your brain. Like I've lived my whole life knowing that, 30 minutes is enough exercise per day to like maintain like a large amount of mental health, right? And to also maintain longevity and fitness. And they say after about 8 hours of training per week, you're actually sometimes fighting against your body. Like if you're trying to live the longest you can, training 20 hours a week is not how you do it. They say somewhere around that 8 hour a week block is actually better for you, than training past that constantly. But my whole life, I haven't been training for longevity, and like that's something that's in my head. But I've been training because I want to be the best in the world at something. First it was football or soccer, and then I quickly realized I wasn't gifted enough to be in the best world of that. And then it was
It's
mountain
a
biking.
painful realization we all must go through.
Yeah, yeah. And then then it was snowboarding for a little bit. I wanted to race border cross. And then it was cross country mountain biking. Um, and uh, then it was quickly like the hybrid space after that. And I did some firefighting races in there, but it was never my focus, like these. So going from that to trying to switch to a mindset of, okay, now I'm training just to be healthy and to maintain as much as I can. That's a switch that is really hard to flip. Is you go from being like, I'm training to be the best in the world, or to be the whatever whoever's listening to this podcast, like whatever your goal is, switching that after you're having health problems or an injury to now I'm in a maintenance mode. Like I'm literally trying to maintain, and also just maintain mental health, but also my fitness. Um, that can be really demoralizing to flip that switch because you're so focused and you're so gifted at something, and then that gets taken away, and now it has to become about like, how much can I maintain, and also maybe I train more like grandma does now, like I'm not training to get faster and faster and faster. I'm actually just training kind of like old people do, to not lose as much as quickly. And that's a really hard switch to flip in your brain. And like, I'm still trying to do that. But it's true. Like anything that you do to maintain your fitness is gonna be better off when you can get back to it. That's something I've always done. And I actually think that's why I'm able to typically come back so quickly from other injuries. Like even in 2023, I spent 6 months of the year struggling with uh, like various lower body, not injuries, but not overuse injuries, but just problems, I would say. Like I sliced the bottom of my foot, got infected, stuff like that. And then because I trained so much cycling and I maintained as much as I could running, as soon as I came back, I was like, it was there. Um, and so I have that ingrained in myself so much that I've never really stopped training. And so it's kind of like the hard water stains on a window. You can clean them off, like your fitness goes away, but as soon as the sprinklers come on the next morning, it's like I just cleaned that window yesterday, and then it's back. Like it's because of years of buildup that they're gonna stay. And that's kind of how I think of fitness, is like the more years that you can just like keep going and keep trying, the quicker those hard water stains of fitness are gonna come back on your window. Like it's just inevitable. So I try and remember that it's a very quick process if you can get back to it. So if you don't stop completely, you're back so much quicker.
That focus on the long game, the infinite game, as it were, has that helped? Because I remember you saying that you want to do the Red Bull X Alps when you're 40. Are you viewing this setback in the sense of decades, or are you so granular that you have to view it in terms of days?
At the beginning, especially prior to HYROX World Champs in June, um, I was actually going out of network to hospitals, like not covered by my insurance, because I was so fit in March that I was rationalizing how much I was spending, because I really knew that I had a very good chance of winning. and I knew what the prize money was, and also because of the notoriety of the sport right now, I knew the money that would flow after. And so for about a month to a month and a half, I was literally calling every hospital that I could and just like, hey, can I see a specialist for this? And here in the US, it can be really challenging to get into specialists quickly because our medical system is so inundated with unhealthy people. Um, and so I was going out of network all the time to try and come back quicker. And that was very much like every day I felt like I was getting farther away from that dream because I truthfully, I wanted to be the first athlete to win like the big three. Like no one has really tried to win an OCR World Championship, a DEKA World Championship, and a HYROX World Championship in the same year. And I felt like I could do that for a little while. So it was a big deal to me. So because of that, I was trying to rush the process. Um, then after that passed, then it was kind of like a grieving period where I didn't really know what to do because I still was waiting for more testing and more appointments. And now, especially the last few weeks, now it's shifted to like, well, maybe this isn't what God has for me right now. Maybe I'm being guided in a different direction. I have to be okay with the fact that I might never be the same again. I might never be the best in the world at anything again, or at least anything in the way that I have wanted to in an athlete way. But that also doesn't mean it's not a possibility in the future. So now I am very much viewing it, maybe not in the terms of decades, because that's really scary to me. Like being 36 and finally being able to breathe right again is a scary concept to me. But that being said, in the sport of HYROX specifically, and OCR, a lot of the top guys are in their mid to late 30s. And so that has been something that I'm very grateful for, that I get to look forward to, is even if this takes me like I am definitely praying that it does not take me more than a couple years. But even if it takes me a couple years to get fully healthy again, which I do think is a possibility still, I'll still be 28, 29, and I like as long as I maintain, um, especially the aerobic fitness, which is kind of like the bread and butter of endurance sports. Anything over 2 to 4 minutes takes hours and hours of training, and HYROX is an hour-long race. And so the longer, I don't know if you want to go into training, but I would explain it simply in this: you have like your LT1 threshold, your aerobic threshold, and then you have your LT2, which is what you can maintain for 40 minutes to an hour. Well, that gap in the middle, if you train the bottom end, like that aerobic threshold, you can push that so that you can essentially not produce as many waste products because you're utilizing more fat for energy and you're not dirty burning as much, is how I would describe it. And so most untrained athletes, the gap between their aerobic threshold and their lactate threshold is very wide. And in elite athletes, it gets narrower and narrower. And they both move up together, but that gap gets narrower typically. And truthfully, I've always worked a lot on the top end and a lot on the very low end. And so this particular health problem is allowing me to focus a lot on the aerobic threshold and nothing up top. And so if I can push that gap, even if my top end's coming down, if I can narrow that gap, at least in the future, if I ever get back to HYROX, maybe I can run, like 330 per K without producing as much lactic acid, or 320 or whatever it is, if I don't just completely throw in the towel and stop training anything. Maybe I can bring that bottom end up. And so like I'm still running like 40 to 50 miles a week, sometimes more. And I'm still on the bike and I'm still in the gym, partly for sanity, but also largely because I am trying to view it in that decade or 5 year mindset of like, if I train my bottom end, the top end is what comes around quick. Like that's the icing and the toppings on top of the cake. But at least I can still keep the cake in the oven and keep baking it. And maybe, like maybe I have to go back to the drawing board and start over again, but it's like that foundation is still there. Um, so I'm really trying to focus on that because the lower end, like the aerobic capacity, is what takes years and years to build. So if I do nothing, that also is going to disappear. But the threshold training and the VO2 max training, that stuff comes around in like 8 to 16 weeks. So if I can keep that lower end going, realistically, like I really believe even if it's 2 years and I've been training that way for 2 years, give me 3 or 4 months of being healthy and I really believe I can be back. And that's between me and God. Like he's ultimately in control of my health. I can do everything that I can do and still never be healthy again. And then there's also people that smoke a pack a day and they can breathe just fine. It's an interesting concept of like, we can do everything we can and still suffer because this world is imperfect, but also we can do everything wrong and still have good things happen. And that's a tricky concept to like keep in the back of your brain. It's like, okay, I'm gonna do everything I can, but also I got to realize that everything good comes from God, right? And so everything I am given, I need to be grateful for, but also not feel like I'm being shortchanged if I'm not given that, because it's a gift, right? Like health is a gift. And that's a very tempting mindset to get into. It's like, I'm doing all of this. Why am I not getting it back? Life is not fair, right?
Proverbs 3 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths." I guess
Yeah.
on paper, that makes a nice Instagram bio or it makes a nice clip on Pinterest. But to live that out on a daily basis, it must be quite hard.
Yeah, the trusting part is very difficult for me, especially when I've been, maybe unknowingly so, controlling my life for so long, or attempting to. Like, I'm going to go do this. Like, I've literally always been the kid ever since I was young. Like, I want to be a firefighter. I'm going to go do that. Did it. I'm going to be an athlete. I'm going to go do that. Worked for years. Did it. Like, I want to be a world champion. I'm going to focus on that. And then it's like checking boxes, right? Um, Thankfully, if 4 or 5 years ago, I started to realize after I had checked all of these boxes that it actually never made me feel more fulfilled. So thankfully I've had that life lesson prior to this. So I don't feel like my life is over in that sense. Like I'm done checking boxes and I can't progress anymore. Because I have already realized, like, before I even won my first world championship last year, I realized that it wouldn't make me any happier if I won. And it didn't. Like for a split moment, it's like, cool, I just hit a goal. And then as soon as it's over, it's like, okay, now I need the next one. Like that's literally how it feels. And so uh, I think some people have thought I've been strange most of my life because as soon as I hit a goal, like a lot of people go to celebrate, and I've I kind of just let it pass. Like I I accept that it was a cool thing, and then like I don't go party or really celebrate that much because it's just another day, right? Like any day that we have is a gift. So I can't remember where the verse is at, but it's actually in the Bible where it's like, don't consider one day as more special than another. I need to
Romans
look that up.
14.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Paul is saying that whatever you do, do for the glory of God. You can host feasts and that be for the glory of God, or you can eat just vegetables and that be for the glory of God. And it talks about having one day as special, which is the Sabbath, or having every day as special. And he
Yeah.
said, let each be convinced in their own mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think or I have also kind of applied that in my life in the way of like, uh, for instance, I grew up in a family where we didn't really celebrate holidays that heavily, or even birthdays and things like that. Like we'd have a birthday celebration, but also I was always taught like you don't wait to tell someone that you love them only on a special day, or you don't wait to give someone a gift only on a special day. Like, yes, give them a gift on their birthday. That's awesome. But what about the rest of the days? Like, what if they don't get to that birthday? So I think that's something that's been ingrained in me, is like, to me, that also means like, don't kind of like a lot of Christians will, on Sunday they're holy and then they're not on other days. And every day we're supposed to be living as a sacrifice, right? A self-sacrifice. We're supposed to be an example. And I fail at that all the time. But it doesn't mean that you don't try on days that aren't as special, right? Because every day is special. Every day is a gift. So that's definitely something that I've been trying to remember as well.
The wilderness, in a biblical sense, is an interesting phenomenon. So if we look all through the scriptures, Jesus went into the wilderness, then he could start his ministry. And even in Exodus, Moses went into the wilderness for 40 years. And you think, well, why on earth was he in the wilderness for 40 years? And it was because it took him 40 years of herding sheep in the wilderness to become the man that God wanted him to be, to then use him. So Moses. He was an arrogant Pharaoh's son, as you could imagine, and it took 40 years of breaking down, of Moses breaking down, and then God filling him up, so that he could then go to the point where, when God calls him to go to Israel, he says, "No, don't choose someone else. Don't choose me." Every arrogance that Moses possessed beforehand dissipated. Even David was in the wilderness for 7 years, learning how to become a king, so that by age 30 he could go and be the king. So in terms of wilderness, we all go through it. And it's just whether or not we learn our lessons in it, so that we can then become the person that God needs us to be. Do you see any correlation in any of those stories with your own? Or is this just something different? Or is this completely transformative?
To be completely honest with you, I actually have thought about what you just said, but I have not viewed it in that light completely. But it is true, and it is something I've thought about, how a lot of the time in history, especially in scripture, we see this principle of like, people are not ready for their next step. But to turn that on yourself when you feel like you're ready and you feel like you have been living a certain way to be ready, but then not be given that, maybe I am too arrogant. Like, maybe I think I'm ready, but I'm not. That's where it's really tricky to me. And I've actually been studying a lot on the will of God. I'm sure if people can't tell yet, I'm a Christian. And so to me, I do think that we're designed and things are happening for a reason. I also believe and realize that this world's not perfect, and everything good comes from God, is what's taught, right? So if you remove God, you have everything that is not good, because goodness is from him. Love is from him. And so because we live in a fallen world and he allows free will, bad things will happen. Sin will happen. Sickness will happen. And realizing that maybe I'm not ready for what he's preparing me for, that's hard when you feel like you are. Or you were already there and it kind of gets taken away. I don't really know what to do with that besides just trust, like the verse that you're saying in Proverbs. Like, trusting with all your heart is so difficult, but I also think that's literally the only thing that keeps me going right now, because I've literally dreamt about being able to do what I do, at the level that I do. I have literally, since I've been 5 or 6 years old, I've wanted to be a pro athlete. And I got there, and I was doing well there, and was able to make a living that way. And now that is not the case. And that's been my biggest dream since I was a kid. Like, I literally don't know what to do now, to be completely honest with people, besides trust that my plan is not as good as God's plan. which there's other scripture about, like how my ways are higher than your ways, right? And then also like man's wisdom is foolishness to God. And so like even though I can see this what seems to me like this perfect pathway in my life, that doesn't mean that it's actually the best thing for me. That's really hard for me to trust some days, but literally that faith and that trust is the only thing that's really getting me through, because I've done, at least on paper, as far as I can tell, like I've methodically gone through different things of like, how can Rylan heal and get better and get back to what he wants to do? And I still don't know. I've spent thousands of dollars. I've been to literally the supposed to be the best guy in the country for vocal cord dysfunction, where your vocal cords don't open so you can't breathe well. Things like that. Like I've been to that guy and traveled to go see that guy, and I still didn't really get an answer. And so I've definitely stepped back into the mindset of like, well, maybe this is just not my time right now, and my job is to do everything I can do and then trust. And that is really difficult for me. Really difficult.
In doing that trust, and we spoke earlier about not being able to hit those higher zones of intensity when out training. You've done a lot of zone 1 training. Now, to some people, that might seem quite odd. Like, what on earth are you doing in the zone 1? And obviously, you're building that aerobic base. Have you managed to graduate from the zone 1 training of the early days, or are you still doing a lot of zone 1 training?
I'm still doing a lot, especially on bad days. But I'm definitely able to pretty consistently get into zone 2 now, which for me is between like 137 and 155 beats per minute. Some days I've even been able to get into like old zone 3 paces. And in the last March would have been about 5 months ago. So in the last 5 months, I've been able to probably have 5 or 6 workouts, all of which were in the last month, where I actually got into zone 4. And that felt really good because I enjoy speed. I enjoy feeling fast. And so when I run fast, I feel, I don't know if you know Eric Little in Chariots of Fire, when he's like, when I run fast, I feel God's pleasure. That's exactly how I feel. When I feel like I'm moving very quickly through space and time, I feel that pleasure. And so I've had a few workouts where lately where I have felt that again, and I can't tell you how good that feels. But it's very inconsistent, and I never really know which day is going to be terrible and which day is going to be good. And often I'll get like my throat will start to close off, or I'll feel very restricted towards the end of the workout, but I'll take it. Like anything to keep me from regressing as far. And as far as the zone 1 training, like sitting on the couch versus going and riding at 150 watts or going and running at 9-minute mile pace or whatever. Like if you are an elite athlete, like one of the best in the world at what you do, doesn't matter what sport it is, and you go from that to 0 versus that to level 1 or 2, like say you're at level 10 and you go back to level 2 and all you can do is level 2 training, like you're still going to be a lot better when you get back to doing what you love. You're going to be so much better if you got like touches on the ball, if you're some sort of ball sport player like soccer, basketball, football, volleyball. Like if you got touches, even if it was at a very low intensity or very low level of playing, you're still going to be way better than if you did nothing for years. So if I have 2 years of this, or God forbid 5-10 years of this, like, dude, I would be, if I just sat on the couch and did nothing, I would be so unfit. I'd be so fat. Like, I don't even know. I don't want to know what I would look like, let alone feel like. So, yeah, that's not an option. Doing nothing's not an option, because in that case, your health is going to decline in other areas as well. So then maybe the original problem, comes back. But if, for instance, if I'm trying to train consistently at 50 miles a week, And then this has happened, and I go to running 0 to 5 miles a week just because I feel so slow. And I'm like, it's not worth it. Well, if I ever magically, like at this point, I feel like it's got to be magic. If I ever feel better, or a doctor finally figures it out, or I figure it out, um, if I've been running only 0 to 10 miles a week or 5 miles a week for 6 months, and then I try and go straight back into 50, I'm going to get injured. But if I run 50 miles at a slower pace right now per week, even if it feels like I'm dying sometimes, like at least I have the soft tissue that can handle that kind of mileage when I need to dial up the intensity. Like at least I have that foundation. Because in endurance sports, you've got to have volume. So it's kind of like the perfect way to structure your season, if you have the time and the base for it, is like ton of volume with a little intensity, and then as you get closer to the race, you dial up the intensity and you drop slightly on the volume. So at least I can have the first part, like the first layer of the cake, before I lay on the next two, and then put the frosting and sprinkles on top. Like it's better than starting from zero. Much better. So because that foundation, like mixing, maybe call it like mixing the dough, making the batter for the cake, like that's the hardest part. After that, you just got to stick it in the oven and cook it, So yeah.
The last one in which I wanted to talk about, in which you have advocated for, is really prioritizing your strength training.
Yeah. Yeah. That is one of the easier things. Like heavy strength training is one of the easier things. I do get episodes of, I really only fainted once or twice, but I get close sometimes. Not just strength training. Usually it's like when I'm singing at church, or that's also been very sporadic. It's hard to put a finger on why that happens to me. The last couple weeks, it's actually been great. I haven't had any spells in the last 2 weeks. But prior to that, I was getting a lot of like near fainting spells, or fainting. Um, Even when I was just like doing rock climbing, super chill. It was weird. Strength training, most of the time, I feel pretty okay. And so they actually did a study in Norway not too many years ago, where they did was like a simple 4x4 squat cycle 3 times a week on different, actually, like not just elite level runners, but like intermediate and beginner. They had a broad range of male and female athletes that were specifically runners. They were endurance runners, who typically shy away from strength training. And they put them on a 3 times a week 4x4 squat cycle. That was it. Nothing fancy. And their time to exhaustion, in their like baseline running test after 8 weeks of this cycle, improved by about 20%.
Wow.
Which is massive. And then their running economy actually improved by about 5%. And then their rate of development, so their progression of how fast they were getting, also improved by about 26%. That's massive. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that they hadn't done strength training prior to that. And you get massive benefits at the beginning. But I don't think that endurance athletes still, like, it's becoming more trendy, thankfully, in a good way. But a lot of endurance athletes don't realize how much benefit they can get from heavy strength training, not just like doing glute bridges, and like band work. I mean, like actually throwing some heavy weight on the bar and squatting, or putting a ton of weight on a sled and driving like you can barely push it. You can actually become a better runner by doing those. And so if I can't train my upper intensities running, I might as well focus on the lower intensity and then strength, because that will also slow my rate of decline in fitness. So
That 4x4 that you're talking about, how hard are they going? Is it 1 rep in reserve, or are they going max?
about 1 rep in reserve. So like when I actually do that cycle a lot, I usually go, and for most of my athletes, I do a similar thing where I don't only want to focus on 4x4, because that's not like the numbers aren't special. Like doing 4 reps versus 3 reps is not going to magically make you a better athlete. However, being able to work through a lot of different rep cycles will make you better. So typically I cycle through like a 2x20, 3x10, 4x8, 4x5, 4x4, 4x3, or 5x3, and then 5x2. Um, and as you work down the rep cycle, you should be jumping up higher and higher in weight. And especially when you get to like the 4x4, 4x3, and 5x2, like you should be like those 2 reps should be very difficult, and maybe even have a spotter. Like you could maybe have a half a rep in reserve on that, but you should be, especially on the last, like the rep 4 and, or sorry, the set 4 and set 5. Like I want to barely be able to get that up. And sometimes I actually put a box behind me, because if I did last week, I was working out with my girlfriend actually, and I got stuck on the box. I couldn't come back up. It's embarrassing. She had to help. She had to like take the weight off the ends so I could get back up out of my squat. And I was like, But yeah, that happens. That's why you do that. That's why you have the safety bars, or you learn how to like dish it off your back if you're stuck, so you don't get injured. But yeah, that it's very important to lift very heavy if you want to. It also improves like human growth hormone. Testosterone in men is massive, so lifting really heavy helps with that, bone density, all those things.
That's what Rylan's been doing for the past few months. What have you got planned for the next few months? Just knocking on the door, same as, same as.
No, not same as. So I will be taking on a couple more clients. I think I'm gonna actually open. I have like this link in my bio on Instagram that's been closed for a while for coaching applications because I've been full. I think I'm gonna open 2 more spots, so I'll be doing a bit more coaching. Um, and then I have Starlink in my van, which is awesome because you can work from anywhere. And I have a solar setup, so I'm actually gonna upgrade the solar on my van. Um, and maybe get an extra battery so I have like more in reserve so I can run Starlink longer. And I'm tossing around the idea of driving the van from North America all the way down to South America and just like slow rolling it, like surfing along the way. And obviously like I'll keep, I have a bunch of sandbags that I bring. So doing a bunch of strength training, and then stopping at gyms from like, I have friends in Mexico City. I have a lot of friends in Ecuador. I have some friends in Panama even. And there's probably friends I don't even realize have places there that I know of, and kind of like stopping along the way and doing like mini training camps. And then also picking up new activities like surfing. I want to get better at surfing. I've only done a little bit of it. And then I have a new Speedwing now, that's faster. And there are a couple races that they have here in Utah before I leave, where you run to the top of the mountain and then you fly down a couple times. So I'll be doing hopefully 2 of those prior to leaving. And then I'm heavily considering just leaving, kind of disappearing, but I'll still have the internet. But like just slowly rolling through Mexico and then down through Central America and then down into South America. Like I really, I'm heavily considering that you might see a progression of, food getting more and more like tortilla centric as I go down. And then as I go farther down into South America, the tortilla gets a little farther away from the plate again, and you start having like plantains and potatoes and stuff, a little bit more, and more rice too. So yeah, it's I'm kind of exciting. Like I need something in life that I can look forward to. Um, and I've been to so many doctors and hospitals. To be quite frank, I don't think anyone is gonna help me. Uh, so I'm gonna try and get into a couple more. Maybe do some like silent acid reflux testing to see if the acidity of my stomach is like burning my throat on the way up or something. Things like that. I've tried switching my diet. Tried a lot of things. So I'm just gonna continually like try and switch different things out of my diet, trying different breathing techniques, like all that stuff. But there's not much tying me down to the US anymore. And I need something, like some sort of adventure. If it's not winning a world championship, I got to have something that's like, I'm going to go do this and it's going to be scary. And that'll be fun. And so that's kind of what that's really high up on the list.
Awesome. Rylan, it was great to have you back on, and I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future.
Thanks for having me, man. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.